Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of L Forum's Leadership Speak series. I have the privilege and honor of having the CIO of Associated Bank, Mike Meinolf, on this episode. And hello, Mike.
Hello,
Good to see you again. Good to have you back. And it's a pleasure
be
as
here.
always. Uh, Mike, as I shared with you, this is a group where we're looking to have a confluence of leaders and entrepreneurs and academicians to talk about what leadership is, what entrepreneurial leadership is, and how we could benefit by each other's experiences. So, without further ado, I would request you to give a brief background to our audience about your background as to how your journey has been as a leader today.
Sure, absolutely. So, thank you for having me. First off, I am Mike Meinolf, as you said, CIO of Associated Bank. I've been in this role for 3 years. I've been with the bank about six. Prior to that, I spent a stint at the clearinghouse where I was exposed to all sorts of innovative leaders across the largest banks in the country. Certainly shaped my view of what it meant, to be innovative in the banking technology space. Prior to that, I spent about a decade with FIS, Metavante, in various roles in various parts of the country, including Tennessee
Wow.
and Milwaukee. And then I started my career with Accenture. But I think, for me, my all my experiences within financial technology have been shaped by doing things in an innovative way, right? And kind of pushing the limited envelope of what is possible. We've seen banks certainly evolve in the last several years, especially with the pandemic and acceleration to digital. This was a transformation that was happening already, but clearly with the pandemic, the emphasis on what it means to be digital and innovative has taken on new meaning and emphasis and importance. So as we talk about entrepreneurial leadership, I mean, one of the things that certainly means to me is that you have to be bold, right? And you cannot allow what I'll say is previous failure hurdles to influence your future direction. So if you're going to be an entrepreneurial leader and to influence others to think in that way, again, one of the things you cannot do is be influenced by kind of what's possible or what's maybe not worked in the past. I mean, I think that's one of the things you see, fintechs in general do particularly well, and better in banks in a lot of cases, right? Is that they don't worry about anything other than the customer experience and making things better, right? So they don't really want to hear why things aren't possible or
Correct.
won't
Correct.
work, or what regulation might be in place that would prevent them from acting in a certain way. They want to solve the customer experience problem first, and then go back and worry about kind of all the rules, so to speak. I look at Uber is one, and Bird scooters is another, right? There are lots of regulation they had to worry about, incumbents, the establishment, but what they said is there's a better way of transporting human beings, right, to various locations. Let's start
Exactly.
with let's start with that, and then we'll kind of work on the rest later. And that's a scary position to be in, right? I mean, usually, especially in this industry, you want to have all the answers up front. And so you have to think about, well, can you move forward and can you inspire without having all the answers, right? And I think that's really what separates certain leaders apart from traditional leaders that just going to focus on the here and now rather than what's next.
So thanks. That's a very succinct and very well put. And then considering the world, the regulated world that you live in, it's not easy to make changes and have people adopt changes. So having been in the financial services pretty much almost all your career, what drove you to become more of an entrepreneurial leader? What was your motivation to become an entrepreneurial leader, different from others?
Yeah, well, I think I'm a technologist at heart. So I mean, part of it's just my personality. Is like I'm always been interested in what's next, and not so much what's now is important, but really what's next is critically important to me. I've my career has been primarily in the payment space and payments innovation. And so I've seen what is possible. And when we think about the banking industry and this cannibalization of the banking industry by FinTechs, payments is where everything started, and certainly is the most visible example, right, with PayPal and Venmo and all these different payment features that are out there where people say, hey, we can make a real difference here in terms of funds availability, et cetera, outside of the banking rails. And so seeing how those fintechs operated, and again, not worrying about the what's current, like what's now, but like what's next, and thinking about how we again kind of make the facilitating payments convenient. That to me, and when you see how those fintechs operate, that's who I want to be, right? That's what inspires me as a person. And so it's easy for me to look at that and say, well, this is how I think we should inspire others. And my kind of big push as CIO is, we can be different, right? We actually have the capacity, to make a difference in our customers' lives. Banking's still important. People, a lot of people, dog banks, but honestly, it's still, when you think about major life events, a bank is still typically there, right? So whether it's your first house, your first car, et cetera, typically, there's a bank involved in that process. Your first job, your first paycheck, all those things, right? And so because it's interwoven, especially in the fabric of life here in the States, certainly, being part of that, ecosystem, and saying, well, we can make a difference. We can actually make it better. We absolutely have the capacity, to change, people's lives. I think that is inspirational, and to kind of push that forward. So it aligns really with my personality, right? It's just something, I've always strived to be innovative, right? Strive to be part of innovation, and so I kind of lead the same way.
Yeah, in fact, I remember one of our conversations when you were, in the early days when you're just taking over. You said, Ringo, I can always run the bank, but I think I want to change the bank. So I have that kind of stayed with me about your persona and your approach to it, and which is, I think, very refreshing, because unless you make change, you don't know what new options exist, right? So change is the only constant, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, people that, that know me, such as yourself, right? To never really be satisfied, right? You're always looking for what's next. There's an innate drive for that. I think you have it, right? I have it. There's this, how do we move on to, so we don't always have to kind of look at our current situation and say that's it,
Yeah.
right? It's like, how do we look for that next opportunity? And there's lots out there. And I think you have to have that eye, to the future in order to affect your leadership in the same way. I think people that are very, in the present, also operate that same way, and you can tell with their interactions with individuals, right? And just how they choose to lead is, let me focus on the tactical today. Let's get the task list done, but not necessarily thinking about how to optimize that, right?
Yes.
Change it, going next, right? And you kind of see those gaps all over the place in different industries for sure.
And that kind of segues into my next question, which is, when you're changing, you face challenges. So what have been your challenges, learnings, and let's say even tough spots in your life so far? What have been your learnings, if you were to?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that is a challenge and has been a challenge, still is a challenge, right, is that I think when you kind of think in an entrepreneurial type way, you think everybody thinks that way, right? And the reality is a lot of people do not. They're very comfortable in their own kind of box that they've defined. And so it can be frustrating at times when you want to push the envelope a little bit, and you have a whole slew of individuals that their entire drive seems to be to find ways why you can't do something. And so you're hoping that you're inspiring enough to get people over that, but the reality is, it's not everybody's interested in pursuing what's next. They very much like where they are, and they get comfortable. And so that's certainly been one of the challenges. I think fostering a culture of innovation in general like to your point about change, is hard. Especially in an industry that's as heavily regulated as the banking industry, because this balance between safety and soundness, and then also being convenient, right, and frictionless and personalized. Sometimes those things can be at odds, right, or at least some people think they are. And you have whole roles, right, in my industry, entire job descriptions of people whose sole reason for existence is making sure that somebody doesn't make a mistake, right, or we don't overstep our bounds from a regulatory perspective. And so they very much view their role as saying, well, here's all the pitfalls that I foresee in this, right? And that's their job, is to create those, not necessarily to figure out how to get around those, right, or solve.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody else's job, right? I'm just there to point it out. And I think that challenge of that constant kind of balance between meeting regulatory obligations and yet still trying to push the envelope is harder than I thought it would be, right? I mean, I'm not a banker by trade, right? As I've mentioned in my history, I've worked for FinTechs, and yeah, larger FinTechs, but still not at the same kind of operating level and regulatory level as a a bank, right? And so just kind of finding, like, why is it that some banks just have a really hard time adapting and keeping up. And you start to see that, again, you're talking about, in some cases, hundreds of years of institutionalization of just doing things the same way over and over again, because it's worked, right? It's a formula that's worked. You don't want to make too bold moves, because you could put your customers in jeopardy, those kind of things. And so again, that cultural inertia and trying to overcome that, always a challenge. There's always people that seems to be kind of like want to pull you back a little bit and slow you down, and that's hard when you want to move fast, when you have to respond to those that are, again, whose sole reason for existence seems to be to slow things down.
So one thing is that I always thought about is how much of fear is a factor in the resistance to change sometimes in your world, in your banking industry.
I mean, I think that's the fear of the unknown is probably the top leader in terms of resistance to change, because again, there's many aspects of banking in particular that you want to know all the answers to the questions, right? And sometimes, just by the nature of some of the innovative paths you're going down, you're not going to have all the answers, certainly not day one, right? And being able to react in real time to information as it becomes available is a skill not everyone possesses, right? And so that's uncomfortable for people. And so the initial reaction is, well, why don't we just avoid that altogether? Just kind of do things the way we've always done. But I will say this, if there is any good that's come out of this pandemic, it's the fact that, the cultural shifts, especially in banking, as I told my staff, it's like 100 years of culture changed over a weekend. This notion that, yes, it can be done. Yes, we can still run the bank remotely. And yes, that the ability to work anytime, anywhere, on any device, just like the ability to bank anywhere, anytime, on any device, are very congruent. And it's important that we kind of foster that experience. And so I think, not that, I would say that we've kind of, eliminated all fear when it comes to change, but I think people have come to expect that, hey, change is going to happen, especially because just the way the reaction to the pandemic, at least in the United States, every week there was new information, different protocols, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, right? Very confusing. But I think also people realize that you have to react to the information at hand, and that information is going to change, and can you adapt to it? So, I look at, our PPP loan program that we stood up. I mean, there was something that, quite frankly, the regulators didn't have fully defined. And so we had to adapt to that. Here's a product, that we had to stand up and provide to our customers with, little to no definition, at least initially. And every week there was some sort of change, and we had to react to that. And here was, again, a whole industry reacting in this way. And that's just like, another day at the office for most fintechs, right? That's what the world is to them. And banks, not so much, but they had to adapt, right? And those that did it well, like Associated Bank, did well with that program, and those that didn't, it really struggled. And so I think that, kind of proved that, hey, we can do this, and that it's not as scary as you think. And even if it is a little bit scary, there's ways and methods to say, well, we can, kind of make it less scary over time. We don't have to, risk everything right away, but we'll have to have some faith, right? And I think that's one thing that was learned, at least within our institution, is that, yeah, we can do this and we can adapt. And it's okay if we don't have all the answers today, because if we're wrong today, we can be right tomorrow, and that's okay.
Amazing. That's a very, very pragmatic way of approaching it. My other question to you is just kind of building on what I asked you. As a leader, how did you tackle? I'm sure there were fears or apprehensions at the leadership level above you, at your peer level, and also among your team members and your subordinates. How did you address it as a leader? How did you address their fears or challenges or apprehensions?
Well, I mean, I think,
And help them move on, basically.
yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to, have some early successes, and whether it's, demonstrating that, hey, look, I've done this before, and hopefully they, they can respect that, but also, showing early on that, we can get some early wins, and that this isn't as scary as you think, that the world isn't going to end. And then over time, you start building up that confidence. I think if you, and again, you have to kind of believe your own rhetoric, so to speak. And in my case, I certainly do. I mean, I'm a fan of change. And I think that resonates with my staff. They kind of see me like, well, hey, Mike changes, right? He's willing to adapt. He does things differently. He's here, right? That kind of, again, resonates and says, he actually believes what he's talking about here. And then in the execution part of, the world, like I was saying, if you can start relatively small, have those early wins to say, you know what, it's not as scary as you think. And, oh, and by the way, this is successful. Let's build upon that success and keep it going. That's one way to kind of ease in. Now, the thing with the pandemic that was so interesting is that, we've always had remote work. I mean, it's not like, nobody's ever worked remotely at the bank. I mean, we have snowstorms here in the Midwest, and sometimes that prevents people from getting into the office. But I think it was this permanency of saying, hey, now we're going to do a much larger group and for a longer period of time. But that was like literally over a weekend. It was like, hey, if you can work remotely, stay home. And if you can't, we're going to help you get home, right? And I think that was, a big, eye opener to say, despite all this change, a sudden change, we survived. And not only did we survive, we thrived. And now, right now, people, I honestly, probably couldn't imagine working any other way, right? It's, it's this flexibility that's been, instilled. It's like, hey, I can be flexible. I can change. We did it once before. Sometimes you just need to have, again, that success in whatever form it is. That gives you the confidence that the next time will be.
Your mantra
good.
is go for early successes, go for small successes to kind of mitigate the apprehension and fear. That would
Absolutely.
be, yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings me to my last question of our little chat is, what is your advice to young leaders, entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurial leaders as to how they should, the audience here is of a mixed, they are from multiple verticals and so on. What would
Yeah.
your
I mean,
advice be
the
to
advice
them?
I give to anybody that asks me, like, I get asked a lot, like, well, how do you, what would you give advice to somebody that maybe wants to be a CIO in their life, at some point? And I said, well, first off, you cannot be afraid to take a chance, and you're going to have to take a chance on yourself, right? And that means that you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations sometimes where you're not going to know everything, and that's the only way you're going to grow and get better. If you're always in a kind of a subject set that you're an expert in, right? If you're always the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? At the end of the day, you have to stretch and challenge and not be afraid to, take an opportunity that comes your way, that because that opportunity may not be there forever. I look at my career, I I had an opportunity to move away from Chicago to, go to Milwaukee. And then there was an opportunity to, take over and lead, a company in Nashville, Tennessee. And yeah, I mean, I had to take that opportunity. You certainly can allow those things to, to pass by, but it's a lot harder, I think, than to really get that breadth of experience that you need to make a difference, in people's lives. And those aren't easy decisions, right? I mean, as I tell people, if you think you're not going to, at least at some point, sacrifice some things, some comfort, right, in order to move forward, it's very few people get that luxury, right? Most of us have to go through some period of time that is uncertain, and again, the ability to be bold and say, well, yeah, no, I'm gonna put myself in this uncomfortable situation that I don't quite understand, but I'm gonna learn some things. Yeah, like I've said before, you never want to be the smartest person in the room for a long period of
Very
time.
well said. Very well said. So great, Mike. That was it from my side. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have a super busy schedule, and but finding a few minutes for us was really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
I
for
would,
having me. Appreciate it.
and I would like you to be part of this because we are planning to have probably a little more interaction with leaders like yourselves, and making it more meaningful for all of us who participate in this forum. So thank you, and I'd love you to keep participating with us, and wish you all success and many more successes to you and associated.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too.